evening and welcome to tonight's Undaunted, bringing to the news on Touch stories. I am Oyi Okbala. Let's begin. Communities across southern Cameroon continue to grapple with a mix of hope, hardship, and resilience as institutions and citizens confront challenges ranging from insecurity and infrastructure failures to justice and public health. While some developments offer relief, others underscore the urgent need for lasting solutions to issues affecting thousands of lives. This night, we'll bring you the Bamenda Regional Hospital Board Chair's assurance of a swift recovery following the devastating fire at the hospital, the release of a Catholic priest and two religious brothers after days in captivity, the compelling story of Kome, Melchizedek, whose prison ordeal reflects the plight of thousands of inmates across the southern Cameroon, and the concerns of students in Bambili downquarter as a month-long power outage disrupts their studies during ongoing examination. But first, let's get the prime headlines. Tonight on Undaunted, Bamenda Regional Hospital Board Chair assures swift recovery after devastating fire. Tonight, Kome Melchizedek, Congonial's ordeal reflects the plight of thousands in Cameroon's prison. Tonight, we take a look at Catholic Diocese confirming release of kidnapped priests and two religious brothers. Also tonight, students in Bambili downquarter decry month-long power outage amid ongoing examination. While on the African scene, Tanzania deploys security forces ahead of planned democracy protests, while traditionalist Catholic groups defiles Pope consecrates 4 bishops without Vatican approval. Now let's get the news in full briefings. The chairman of the Bamenda Regional Hospital Management Board, Professor Fru Ngwafo, has assured hospital staff, patients, and the general public that immediate recovery efforts will commence following a devastating fire that destroyed a major administrative block at the hospital on Monday night. Professor Ngwafo gave the assurance during a visit to the hospital more than 24 hours after the incident, where he personally assessed the extent of the destruction and received briefings from the hospital administrators. The blaze ravaged an administrative building housing 10 key services, including the Central Drugstore, Medical Records Department, Human Resource Office, Hospital, Library, Account, Procurement, and several other administrative sectors that are critical to the day-to-day management of the referral health facility. Describing the incident as a serious setback for the institution, Professor Ngwafo acknowledged the magnitude of the losses, but stressed that the Hospital Management Board is determined to restore normal administrative operations without delay. According to him, he says that this is undoubtedly a difficult moment for the hospital, but it is not one that will stop them from fulfilling their mission. According to him, he promised that the board are committed to beginning recovery after immediately and mobilizing every available resource to ensure that the affected services are restored as quickly as possible. While hospital authorities confirmed that despite the extensive destruction of the offices, patient care has remained uninterrupted. Clinical services reportedly continued throughout the incident, and no injuries or fatalities were recorded amongst patients, visitors, or staff. The cause of the fire remains unknown and is currently under investigation by the competent authorities. Officials say findings from the investigation will help determine the origin of the blaze and guide measures to prevent similar incidents in the future. Preliminary assessments indicate that the fire destroyed documents, equipment, pharmaceutical office furniture, and other valuable hospital assets. The resulting material losses are estimated to run into hundreds of millions of CFA francs. The incident has raised fresh concern over the resilience of healthcare infrastructure in southern Cameroon, where public institutions continue to face numerous operational challenges. Nevertheless, hospital management has reiterated its commitment to maintaining essential health services while reconstruction and recovery efforts are underway. Authorities have appealed for patience and support from staff, partners, and the public as the hospital works to restore the damaged administrative department and strengthen measures aimed at safeguarding the facility against future emergencies. All right, tonight we have our in-house analyst, Barrister Mbeshia, in the house. Barrister Mbeshia, welcome to tonight's Undaunted.
Thank you for having me once more.
All right, Barrister. This fire broke out at the beginning of the week, and we have tried to do follow up as a team, and we can see that for the first time there seems to be a positive response in terms of the health care of the people. We have seen the prompt move when the fire broke out. We saw how the people tried to calm the fire, and right after that, the hospital board are coming forward to make promises and to assure the people of the equipment that were lost in the fire, the drugs and everything that were just lost in the fire to be restored. It seems to be a very quick one, but we do not know if it's just mere promise or if they will keep to their words. And as someone who have been in the system, who knows how these kind of things work, I would like to get your point of view as regards to all of this promise by the chairman of the hospital board.
It's interesting because, when you look into Cameroon history, you learn a lot of things, looking backwards. The truth is that the hospital, that structure was burnt down, irreparably burnt down. From their own report, the computers are all gone and everything that goes with it. The statistics kept in the computers, the files, the medication, they report it themselves, everything is gone. And so, when the board chair comes there and they tell those things and make those promises, it is in their role. They are just making a public promise. They cannot come there by themselves and acknowledge their own failures. They will not. Because who is the board chair in the first place? Board chair people in Cameroon are named by the administration. If any failure, it comes from the administration. And so we don't expect them to come there and blame themselves. No. The report of the fire incident tells a lot of stories. Even in that report, I listened to the report myself, the praises. The guy praised even the fire department that came. Well, interestingly, the fire department came after the fire. Everything had gone. So it is a rapid response force called the fire department. They came there to sell after the market. What does it mean to us? To make it a little bit self-explanatory, you have lost people in our families. We've lost loved ones, husbands, children, wives. And what will happen? The crowd will come down and say, "Oh, mommy, sorry, papa, sorry for you. We'll pray for you." Does that change the fact that the person died? It doesn't change. Does it provide the cure if the child died of some type of malaise without any care? Would that help the thing? No. They will promise that we'll do this for the future. Will they do it? We don't know. But do you expect them to admit that they will not do it? No, they will never do it because they are speaking for the administration. They just step back a bit and see, compare this. This is a fire disaster. This is something that nobody expected. This is a hospital run by a board. Let us take it back, for example, just to compare, to the GCE board, whatever you will call GCE. We're all aware right now, public record, that the GCE has leaked. The board chairman of the GCE comes out. He has not addressed the cause of the leakage. What has he said? We'll follow up. We'll do everything possible for the future. Who is the board chairman of the GCE board? Is somebody appointed by the government. And so, once it is a government failure, you don't expect them to come there and say, no, government is wrong. Back to the hospital report. The guy praised the regional council, whatever thing they call it, the regional council. Again, I said last time when we talked about this thing, if there was a fighting department there, why did he not get there in time? Maybe there was no road. Very many things could have accounted for that. And so, you take those things with a pinch of salt. Yes, they will restore. They will do everything. They will provide new computers if they have the money. They will put up a new building if they have the money. If you don't have the money, they will take a loan for that. But would that restore the medical records burned down? Would that restore the information that was stored in those preserved computers? That will not. If it is successfully done, it will only help the future patients with their records there. And so the damage has been done. Could they have prevented this? I've always said they would have prevented this. In those strategic buildings, which house those tough technical things, there should be the maximum protection against fire. From the report, popularly known, the fire started on the roof. Nobody climbed and put fire on the roof. What will we point to? We will point to some electrical failure. We will point to some electrical failure right up there. Was there construction? The wiring, was it done according to standards? Without. Was there continual inspection to be sure that those cables that put electricity there were still good enough? I doubt. And so again, it is a failure of the whole system. I've just compared it to the GCA board. Take it to any other board, you're going to find the same thing. Board chair people will come out and promise heaven and earth. The regional governors and the regional councils, or what nonsense they call it, they'll come there and promise you heaven. Not even pocketry, they'll promise you heaven. But there's no heaven where you're already in hell. And so, Ambazonians fight is not just about what we're talking. We fight also about the quality of what we have. Because I remember, a year back, or a little bit under that, or a little bit more than that, there was a fire disaster in Bamenda, somewhere else. They purportedly sent their fire trucks there. And the fire truck came and stood there, there was no water even in that nonsense. So they couldn't even try to put the fire out. And so, again, the general failure of what Yaoundé has become is what we're fighting against. Hospitals and those sensitive buildings should be constructed with special care, regularly inspected to be sure they match the standards, particularly in terms of fire, and other security outlets, just like the GCA board. Again, the GCA board has said nothing about the leakage. Where did it come from? Did it come from the teachers? Did it come from the markers? How did the examination get to the students in the rooms? They caught students in the examination rooms with questions and answers. But that's not the beginning of the thing. They have not addressed it. Their so-called minister has not addressed it. And they will not address it. Because they know that at any single point, the finger will point back to them. It may not point to the minister himself. It may not point to whoever is in Yaoundé. But it will point to somebody they appointed, somebody they put there to sit there and respond there and act for them. Because they don't put everybody there. Everybody could just come and become the director of the regional hospital in Bamenda. Them workforce. We know them very well. We know their names. They are politically sensitive names. They are politically protected. And so they give them those things. When it goes wrong, they have to defend them at all costs. Again, they will never come back to acknowledge their own faults, but that is what we are fighting against. We are trying to say that this thing is good for everybody. The data in that hospital, in those computers, The way they had that everybody, the rich, the poor, the small, and the big. And so that is a failure of the system, which we will not acknowledge. Shall we do it better? I guess you 100% we would do it better to be sure that if those things have to occur, I don't know where they are back up somewhere. There must be something back up to be sure that if a computer is destroyed, there's some reserve information kept somewhere secured. Over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Barrister. Let's hope that the computer had some kind of backup so that when it is replaced, we'll know what to do. Well, away from that, let's head into one of the major stories that so many Amazonians would have a brother, a sister, or an uncle who is actually battling this. Now, what was meant to be a brief trip to attend his sister's wedding in 2017 turned into years-long nightmare for mechanic Kome Melchizedek, who has now spent nearly 9 years in detention without a court judgment. Well, according to information available to Undaunted News, Kome was arrested on the 5th of December 2017 during the early stages of the armed war in southern Cameroon. Well, sources familiar with the case allege that his arrest resulted from a case of mistaken identity, with security forces reportedly searching for another individual whose name closely resembled his. Despite spending almost 9 years behind bars, Kome has neither been convicted or of any crime nor granted what rights advocates describe as a fair and timely trial. His prolonged detention has raised serious concerns about due process and the administration of justice. Family members and those familiar with his condition say his health has deteriorated significantly during his years in prison, where overcrowding, poor sanitation, and limited access to healthcare continues to affect many detainees. His case has become emblematic of a broader challenge facing southern Cameroon's criminal justice system. Across the country, thousands of detainees remain in prison, awaiting trial, with many spending years in pre-trial detention before their cases are heard. Human rights organizations have repeatedly expressed concern over prolonged detention, prison overcrowding, and delays in judicial proceedings. Legal observers argue that prolonged detention without trial undermines the fundamental principles of justice under both Cameroonian law and the international human rights standards. Every accused person is entitled to be informed of the charges against them, tried within a reasonable time, or released pending trial, except in circumstances permitted by the law. If the state had credible evidence against Kome Melchizedek, it should present that evidence before a competent court and allow the judicial process to take its course. Well, this was said by a legal analyst. As if no such evidence exists, continued detention cannot be justified. Oh well, while Kome's story has drawn growing attention, everyone advocates that he is far from home. Numerous detainees across Cameroon continue to languish in prisons for years without their cases being concluded, leaving families waiting for answers and raising persistent questions about access to justice. For many observers, Kome's prolonged imprisonment is more than an individual tragedy. It reflects systematic and systemic challenges within the country's justice system and underscores the urgent need to reform that guarantees timely trials, respect for due process, and the protection of fundamental rights. As Kome approaches nearly 9 years in detention without a verdict, his family continues to hope that his case will finally receive judicial attention. Meanwhile, human rights advocates say his ordeal serves as a reminder that justice delayed for one person often reflects a wider crisis affecting many others still waiting to have their day in court. Barrister Mbeshia, you're a legal analyst, an authority in this field. Barrister, it's 9 years, no trial, no verdict. but 9 years in an overcrowded prison. I can't imagine how families and friends would have been feeling for these 9 years. He's not the only one for all we know, but his case has just been pinpointed today. Barrister, I want to get your point of view.
I don't know whether he was arrested or abducted, because a lot of what goes on, particularly in this type of case, is abduction. Arrest, think a person requires that he follow certain type of procedure. There could be no mistaken identity. If they were looking for A or B will bear an identity information. Your name, your picture, your date of birth, and so on and so forth. And so if by mistake they question you and look at your identity card, it's not the person you're looking for, you go free. But they go farming down the streets, catching anybody they suspect has anything to do with the crime, dumping the individuals in jail. Are you expecting a trial? There will be no trial because they have no charges even against him. The poor man was just a victim of adoption. Uncontrolled adoption of citizens, especially in the context of the Ambazonian War. And so they adopted this young man. He's going through what he's going through. He's still lucky to still be alive. They were telling his story now. Scores of them have died. Would not question us. For example, the abducted Wazizi from Boya, without any arrest warrant, took him to Yaoundé. He has never been back. And from their own story themselves, they tell the story he is dead. There are what we don't know. Very well, nobody knows. Not his family, not friends, nobody. And so this is nothing like justice. We cannot even talk about human rights here. If there's anything called human rights, Cameroon is the greatest human rights violator in the world. I doubt if there's any other country like Cameroon. Especially now in the context of the Ambazonian War. All what you need to do is to be talking about Amazonia, you're a criminal. All what you need to do is to watch this thing that we're talking here on TV. They will arrest you and lock you up. And so, how many more years do we have to go through this? How many more years do we have to go through this? I said this guy is just one of the several. I remember seeing a video 2 days ago or yesterday of Kondenge prison. People packed on the ground like a sardine and officially declared to have been infected by tuberculosis. He asked, who is treating these people? Tuberculosis is a contagious disease by itself. It's also infectious. You pack all of them there. Who is caring for who there? What the administration is doing is to make sure you die. Die quickly and spare them the pains of trying to give you food, which food is not even worth the quality of food. And so this gentleman, again, arrested for 9 years without trial, without anything, no court evidence that he had committed anything. He asked himself how he found himself there. How he found himself in the prison. Somebody forcefully dragged him there, signed some piece of papers and gave him to the prison warden, and they locked him up. Once locked up, that's the end of you. And if he dies, and there's pressure on them, they will come out with a fake medical certificate to justify your death. How many of us have forgotten of Anise Ekane that they took after the elections? Took him from, he himself walked to the police or what Jandam to inquire about his own people. They took him down, took his breathing apparatus, took him to jail, and made sure he died. And when he died, the family requested to be part of the post-mortem exam. They refused. Then they were forced to death certificate on him. He died of natural causes. Natural causes? No, that does not exist in law. Because in law, there's a principle that says that take a victim as you find him. If you caught somebody, let me say the very young man we're talking about, if he already has fever, if he already has tuberculosis or any other infections, and he dies, you do not say that he died of that infection. You killed him. Because you took him, a tuberculosis patient, you kept him under you without custody, without care, and he died. So you take a victim as you find him. We call it, I don't know whether it makes sense here. We call it the thin score law, rule in law. If somebody hits a hammer on your head, boom, I head crying and I died. There is no excuse that your head was already very thin. That was so fragile that a small kick would break it. They have killed you. They cannot give the excuse that your skull was already so weakened that when they hit the hammer there, you just had to die. And so back to this very story, it is a bigger story of what we're fighting for. It is under international law. And let me say this again. Back to Communication 266 with 03 of September 2009. The African Commission on Human Rights ruled on Amazonia because we sought to get our independence. Our Diocese argued, amongst other things, that we're entitled to independence. Cameroon considered that, yeah, we're independent people, we're people identifiable who can get independence. But because we joined them, we can only get independence if we show massive abuse of human rights. That's stated there. Is it not massive abuse of human rights? That even international courts will say, no, you can no longer take this lying down. Again, this young man is just one. He's just a symbol, a symptom of the bigger disease. Luckily, he's still alive. We can use his name to talk the bigger problem of Amazonia. We're not born to suffer. Our children were not born to go to jail without crimes. Our people were not born to serve sentence, to serve imprisonment without judgment. No, that's not what we're meant to do. We're not supposed to do that. The African Charter on People's Rights of 2009 states clearly that that should not happen. It is happening in Cameroon. Cameroon is a member of the United Nations. Cameroon is a member of the African Union. Enough is enough. Law is law. It shall apply to them. And if this young man should ever be released, if he's lucky not to die, like others, we shall hold them accountable. They have to pay him compensation for what he has gone through. That's a young man who was living his own life. He probably had a wife and children. You deprive him of everything that he has. Deprive his children, his family of whatever thing he could do for them. And then you think that one day you set him free and he walks away. No. There's no justice without compensation. Justice must be done. People must be compensated for the suffering. People must be held accountable for their acts. Cameroon government shall be held accountable sooner or later. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Barrister. And people must be held accountable. Talking about accountability, the next report says that the Catholic Diocese of Nkong has announced the release of Reverend Father John Bosco Bacon and two members of the Franciscan Brothers of Emmanuel, days after they were abducted in what has become another troubling incident, showing the worsening security situation in southern Cameroon. In a statement dated the 1st of July 2026, the diocese confirmed that Father John Bosco Bacon, Brother Sylvester Siwong, and Brother Maria Rodrigo Soap had safely regained their freedom. Church authorities expressed profound gratitude to Christians and people of goodwill whose prayers and solidarity, they said, have borne fruit. The three religious men were kidnapped during the night of Saturday, June 27, shortly after Father Bacon had traveled to his native village of Melim to celebrate his first Holy Mass following his ordination. Their celebration was cut short when armed men intercepted them in Manbin, BBC, on the outskirts of BBC towards Bangolan. Reports indicated that the kidnappers were armed, operating in the area where insecurity has persisted for years and the ongoing war in southern Cameroon. Their release brings relief to the Catholic community and residents who had spent several days anxiously awaiting news of their fate. However, the incident has once again drawn attention to the deteriorating security across southern Cameroon, where kidnappings, targeted attacks, and arbitrary detentions have become increasingly common. Religious leaders, humanitarian workers, teachers, traditional authorities, and civilians have all been affected by the growing wave of insecurity, with many communities living under constant fear of abduction and violence. The latest, kidnapping, shows the vulnerability of even religious figures carrying out pastoral missions and community activities. As incidents of kidnapping continues to rise, observers say the war remains a significant humanitarian and security concern, with civilians bearing the brunt of the protracted war. Faith leaders and civil society groups have repeatedly called for greater protection of civilians and renewed efforts towards a peaceful resolution to the war that has devastated communities across southern Cameroon. The safe return of Father Beacon and two Franciscan brothers is being welcomed as a moment of hope, but it also serves as a stark reminder of the persistent insecurity confronting communities throughout southern Cameroon. Barrister Mbeshia, this is just last week we talked about some other missionaries who were kidnapped and they were released, and this is another set of Christians, Reverend Fathers, kidnapped and released as well. Just like the report stated, the insecurity is on the rise and civilians bear the brunt of the war. Civilians are bearing the brunt of the war. But let's get your point of view. Is it like a strategy where the missionaries, where the pastors and the priests are being abducted? We know others are being abducted, but it just seems like there is a pattern when it comes to the missionaries. I don't know. You might differ in your thoughts, but then it just seems like there is something that they are going after when they get to want to abduct these missionaries and priests and the likes.
I think we have said it many times here before, there is no room for the adoption of missionaries, be they Catholics or other pastors, or even native doctors. There's no room for that. And so, but they are doing it. Just last week, we were talking about adoption of missionaries. Similar people, priests, coming from DOP, they are gone there for an ordination. They were adopted. They were Catholic priests, Reverend sisters, and so on and so forth. They were all released. These were of the Archdiocese of Bamenda. This one today, we're reporting today. They are Ambazonians, but they had postulated to become priests in Konsamba, in the Diocese of Konsamba. The Diocese of Konsamba is not in Ambazonia, but the individuals adopted were from Ambazonia. And so you ask yourself the questions, must violence follow Ambazonians wherever they go? I don't know whether it is a strategy. If it is a strategy aimed at the Catholic Church, it's the wrong strategy. Because for the best of our knowledge, if there's anybody who has postulated for this thing to end, it is the Catholic Church. The highest authority of the Catholic Church has been brought to Cameroon by the Catholic Church authorities. Less than 2 months ago, he was there talking to Paul Biya to end the war. What else do you expect the Catholic Church to do more than this? There are different priests, there are different pastors, there are different bishops, everywhere have preached against the war. And so they can only do what is humanly possible. But what they are doing, what the abductors are doing, is a reminder to the world that the Ambazonian crisis is not just an Ambazonia. It crosses borders. The effects have a lot of influence on other events around the world. Because those priests, say in Konsamba, they could well have moved to sometimes they transfer them even to Europe, to the Americas, to serve as priests. So it is becoming a transcontinental thing. Yes, there will be a priest of Konsamba Diocese, but who knows? They probably would have been sent to Betua because they have missionaries serving like that. And so it just shows the degree of the insecurity. Must this insecurity end? Of course, it must end. But it is not within the powers of the bishops, the priests, or the pastors to end it. It is within the powers of the government, so-called government in Yaoundé, to end it. They declare the war. They are the ones killing people. They are the ones who are supposed to end it. If they don't end it, there are different forms that Ambazonians must fight the war. We cannot turn the knives on ourselves, catching our own brothers and sisters, call them reverend sisters, reverend priests, or pastors. That they are not the cause of the problem. They are just victims. But again, what has happened now is telling the world that the problem in Cameroon is not just internal. What can the world do? Put pressure on Mr. Pope here to let Ambazonian go. In the royal Ambazonia of southern Cameroon in those days, these were the untouchables. Why? Because they did more than preaching religion. They ran schools for us, and they still do it today. They ran hospitals for the community. They still do it the same thing today. And so why do you target people who themselves are victims? I remember at the beginning of this war in 2016, 2018 or so, the first victims, the key priest in Manfe, the adopted priest in Moyenge in Moyoka. Why? These people were just there. They go to all the rural areas to save the community, religiously and otherwise. Social activities, running clinics, running health centers, running maternities. What is their fault? And so again, we must say this adoptions must end. The targeting of missionaries must stop, but the war must end. Because that will only come under control. When we end the war, people are doing all these things under the pretext of war. If there's no more war, then they will have no reason to be seeing all this. And so the war must end to stop the effects of war affecting both the priests, the missionaries, and ordinary citizens of the country. People must live their lives. And so adopters are criminals. But who is to bring these criminals to book? Who is to investigate their crimes? Nobody else other than government. And if government is not doing it, they are accomplices to the crimes. I've said this many times before. We just talked about the young man caught and locked up in prison for almost 9 years today. How many abductors have been locked up like that? They had the power to order looking for that young man, the poor carpenter or mechanic. They lock him up. They will not have the guts to go look for adopters, people like that. Why? Is it negligence? Maybe. But it is not just negligence. It is complicity in what is going on. And they challenge them. If they go there, if they go to this priest, they will tell them the people who caught them. They identify them by their faces. And so let the government do what they are supposed to do and end the war and let Ambazonian go. For it is better for us to live as good neighbors than to live as eternal enemies. Over to you.
It's better to live as good neighbors. All right, away from that, let's get into Barr. Students residing in Bambili Downquarter have raised concern over a prolonged electricity outage that has persisted for more than a month, describing the situation as a major setback to their academic activities, particularly as examinations are currently underway. The affected students say the neighborhood, which is predominantly inhabited by university students, has been without a stable electricity supply for weeks, leaving many unable to effectively prepare for their exams or carry out essential academic work. According to several students who spoke to Undaunted, the prolonged blackout has disrupted their daily routines, making it difficult to study at night, conduct online research, charge laptops and mobile gadgets, and complete assignments that require access to electronic devices. Many say they have been forced to rely on candles, rechargeable lamps, or costly generators, while others spend long hours and scarce financial resources traveling to neighboring areas simply to charge their devices. According to a student, says this is a student area and electricity is not a luxury for us. It is necessary for studying, preparing for exams, and charging our learning tools. Students say the timing of the outage could not be worse, as many are currently writing end of semester examinations and require uninterrupted power for revision and academic preparation. They fear the continued blackout could negatively affect their performance and overall academic success. Beyond academics, residents also point to the broader impact of the outage on their daily lives, including difficulties preserving food, accessing the internet, and maintaining communication with family members and classmates. The students are now appealing to the relevant authorities and the electricity company to urgently address the situation and restore a reliable power supply to the area. They argue that access to electricity is essential in a community whose population is largely made up of students pursuing higher education. Those who spoke to newsmen requested that their identities be withheld, citing fears of possible repercussions. They expressed hope that public attention to their plight would prompt swift action from the authorities before the examination period is concluded. All right, Barrister, power outage is no longer a new thing. There are things that seems to be regular. You see bad roads, you see fire outbreak, and then electricity, no electricity. You see that Bamenda is crying today, Bambili is crying tomorrow, Bui is crying the next day, and power seems to be a regular thing, and it's a wonder how the students everyone needs it, the business people, the students. It's just a wonder how they even survive. In a big year like 2026, where nations beg their citizens, when power is about to go off, that is if it ever goes off, then you have a nation where they stay months without light, without power. How sad can it be, Barrister?
Very, very sad indeed. Because, we've taken time before to analyze electric shortages in Cameroon. We were talking about this one because of the university students. And I've had the opportunity before to say that the so-called University of Bamenda, like others, is a university created on piece of paper, without more. If you have been a regular university, the students will live in hostels. And what would that do? There will be electricity there. If there's no electricity there, there will be provision for a standby generator to go functional when electricity goes off. But they are living down the streets, they are living in the quartier. You've said everything. In the modern world today, you cannot live without electricity. Because at the very least, forget about food. If that child took ill, he will need to communicate to his parents who are not just in Bambili with them. Maybe they are just in Bamenda town. Talk less of being in Kome or being in Mount Fair. They have to talk to them. And you cannot talk to them through a telephone. The modern telephone is charged on electricity. And if the parents don't get the information that the child is sick, what will they do? The child will die. First, we just talk about the hospital. They go to the hospital, there's no hospital there. The pharmacy has been bent down. There's no way to communicate to the parents that, look, the child is sick. What will happen? The normal result is death, or deterioration to a point that the child will not go back to that school. And so we ask ourselves, why are we going through all this? I've said this before. This is Bamenda. How far is Bamenda from Menchum? Well, know the story of the Menchum Forest, which, if developed, could supply the whole of West Africa electricity. But why is all this in Bamenda? Because the people must beg electricity from there, from dysfunctional things that they are put there. They must get electricity from Munda. They must get it from Bafusam. On the so-called machines that are dead, they buy second-hand machines to put there. They bring in electrical equipment that has no value, cables and so on and so forth, just as we talked about in the last segment on the hospital fire. And so we'll go through all this. How shall our children survive? Those children will manage. At the end of the day, the university will write pieces of paper and give them, and call them PhD holders, master's degree holders, or whatever degree they have. But do they have to go through what I went through using a creation lamp, using candles to read? No, they didn't need to go through that, because it has been 65 years since we got independence. We did not need to go through that. We needed to be, as of today, a country jealous by other people, but we are a country feared and despised by even our neighbors, because there's nothing to be anxious to come there for. What would you get anxious to go to the University of Bamenda for? If your child will not have lights to read, if your child will not have a hospital to go to, what would you be so anxious to send your child to the University of Buya or any other one? Because the same thing is repeating itself in Boya. You find no electricity in Bulu. Bulu is next door. No electricity in the next street. How do you expect children living inside the quartiers to read? Just talking about students alone. We don't even need to address the parents. But the parents are there. The students, they don't have a lot of money. They buy their food and stock it. They expect that food to be last them for 1 week. But how can you preserve food for 4 days, for 3 days without power? You will not. That thing will get rotten. You either throw it away, you eat it and poison yourself. Either way, the same story is on. What is the explanation of the authorities? As I said in the last segment, somebody will come and give excuses on behalf of the government. Somebody will come there and say he's speaking for the governor, he's speaking for the delegate, and all what you can hear about. Is the governor responsible for electricity? No. Is the regional delegate responsible for electricity? No. Is the regional assembly responsible for all that? No. Nobody will talk to Sokade, what they call it now, which is responsible. Nobody talked to Sonair. Nobody talked to Enyo. Because it has been long going. And you can trace the history only to one source, theft. When they replaced Sonair with Enyo was a company that had gone bankrupt in Texas. They chose to privatize Sonair by giving it to Enyo, when they knew they were not competent to do anything. But they did that for the sake of money. They stole the money, they reaped the profits out of the privatization and went away. And now we are still here. Children in Bamenda are a symptom of the disease. The same thing is happening in Kome. The same thing is happening in So. The same thing is happening everywhere else in Amazonia. The same thing is even happening in Douala. It's happening in Yaoundé. But shall we follow the dead horse to their grave? We're not bound to join them, to die with them. If they refuse to improve on whatever thing they have, we are not bound to be there with them. Because the rule is, and the standard acceptable is, people have the government they deserve. If you don't like that government, kick it out. Since we are not here to kick away the government of Mr. Pobia or no other one in Yaoundé, we are to restore what is ours and hold our own political leaders, our own technicians responsible for our own future. And so, the excuse that there's no electricity in the day, there's no electricity in Douala, in Yaoundé, in Garoua, does not hold as far as we are concerned. We would restore power camp. That will not be enough. We'll develop Menchum and we'll have enough electricity. We'll commercialize part of it to bring it to our economy. And so enough is enough, I've said. We've suffered more than human beings can take. And so all Ambazonians should pray, they should fight, that this restoration must succeed. So that we'll have better days ahead, rather than continue to weep over the a dead horse. We cannot recover that. And so, again, this is a symptom of the disease. This is why we fight. We must fight until we make sure that this generation of children will pass. The next generation will not go through all this. They'll have what we call schools. The schools will include lights, they include energy, and everything that goes to facilitate learning. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Barrister. And we hope that as the day goes by, with all of the cries, the pains that Ambazonians go through, we hope that soonest there will be a call for dialogue. And all of this will just be in the history books of Southern Cameroon. Thank you so much for joining us today on Undaunted. Hopefully, over the weekend, we would see you for Ambazonia this week.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. When we return, we'll get into East Africa, where in Tanzania, security has been deployed ahead of a planned democracy protest. Tanzanian authorities have deployed military personnel and police across Dar es Salaam and other major cities ahead of planned nationwide protests scheduled for 7 July as tensions rise over demands for democratic reforms following last year's disputed general election. The increased security presence comes after the government announced a sweeping ban on all political rallies last week, citing unspecified security threats. Officials did not indicate how long the restriction would remain in effect, drawing criticisms from opposition groups and civil society organizations who argue that the move further limits political freedoms. The planned demonstrations, largely organized by youth activists, are expected to focus on calls for electoral reforms, greater political accountability, and justice for victims who were killed during violence linked to the controversial 2025 election. Protest organizers say the rallies are intended to be peaceful and aimed at pushing the government to strengthen democratic institutions and protect citizens' rights. Security has been heightened in key urban centers, with reports of armed personnel stationed at strategic locations, major road intersections, and government buildings in Dar es Salaam. Similar deployments have also been reported in other major cities as authorities seek to prevent unrest. Government officials maintain that the security measures are necessary to preserve public order and prevent potential violence. However, rights groups have expressed concern that the heavy deployment and blanket ban on political gatherings could suppress legitimate peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. The protests are expected to test President Samia Suluhu Hassan's administration, which has faced increasing pressure from opposition parties and human rights advocates over the country's democratic space. Critics accuse the government of tightening restrictions on political activities despite earlier promises of reforms. The outcome of the planned demonstration is likely to be closely watched both domestically and internationally amid growing scrutiny of Tanzania's human rights record and commitment to democratic government. While we return from the very short break, we'll head into the globe where traditionalists and the Catholic group, the Files Pope, consecrate 4 bishops without Vatican approval. The unauthorized consecration of 4 bishops by the Society of Saint Pius X SSPX marks the most serious challenge to Pope Leo XIV's authority since the beginning of his papacy and threatens to reopen a decades-old rift within the Roman Catholic Church. The SSPX, a traditionalist Catholic society founded in 1970 by French Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, has long resisted reforms introduced by the Second Vatican Council between 1962 and 1965. The groups reject several post-Vatican II changes, including the widespread use of vernacular languages in Mass, aspects of ecumenical dialogue, and the Church's teaching on religious liberty, arguing that these reforms departed from long-standing Catholic tradition. The dispute has its roots in 1988 when Lefebvre consecrated 4 bishops without the approval of Pope John Paul II. The Vatican declared the act schismatic, and Lefebvre and the newly ordained bishops were automatically excommunicated, although Pope Benedict lifted their excommunications in 2009 in an effort to promote reconciliation. The SSPX has never been fully integrated into the Church's canonical structure, remaining in what the Vatican describes as irregular status. In the years that followed, successive popes pursued dialogue with the SSPX. Pope Francis made limited concessions, including granting SSPX priests faculties to validly hear confessions and under certain conditions, witness marriages in an effort to maintain avenue for reconciliation. The latest crisis erupted after the SSPS proceeded with the consecration of 4 new bishops despite a direct appeal from Pope Leo XIV to abandon the ceremony. The Pope described the planned consecration as a scene of extreme gravity, while Vatican officials warned that carrying them out without papal authorization would incur automatic excommunication under canon law. Within the Catholic Church, the appointment and consecration of bishops is a prerogative reserved to the Pope. Unauthorized episcopal consecrations are regarded as one of the gravest violations of ecclesiastical discipline because they challenge papal authority and risk creating an independent hierarchy outside communion with Rome. While the Vatican had not immediately announced their canonical status of those involved after the ceremony, the consecrations have raised concerns that the SSPS could be moving towards a formal schemis, a permanent break in communion with the Holy See. If confirmed, it would represent the most significant internal rupture in the Roman Catholic Church in the 21st century and reverse decades of efforts aimed at healing one of modern Catholicism's deepest divisions. Oh well, as the days goes by, we definitely would see what comes up of the Catholic Church and the SSPX. All right, and that's where we'll draw the curtains on tonight's Undaunted. But first, let's get the recap of the stories that made it to tonight's headlines. After devastating fire. Also tonight, Kome, Melchizedek's ordeal reflects the plight of thousands in Cameroon's prison. Tonight, we told you that Catholic Diocese confirmed release of kidnapped priests and 2 religious brothers, while in Bambili, students in Undaunted decry months-long power outage amid examinations. On the African scene, we told you that Tanzania deploys security forces ahead of planned democracy protests, while traditionalist Catholic group, the False Pope, consecrates 4 bishops without Vatican approval. That's it for tonight's Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. On behalf of Barrister Mbeshia and a team of technicians behind tonight's production, it's good night and God bless you.